All right, folks, so the former President Donald Trump is projected to take back the White House after securing the 270 electoral votes needed to win the U.S. elections. Here to give us his take on the elections, development economist and our good friend, Dr. Christian Stokes. Dr. Stokes, morning, sir. Welcome to Smile. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thank you very much.
I remember the first time this gentleman ran against Mrs. Clinton.
Yes.
And I said right in this seat that there is absolutely no way he's going to be the president of the United States. And he won.
Yes.
When he decided to run again, I said, well, if they ever learned the first time, they must learn now. And there's no way he can win again. Yeah. And he won again. And my word, seems comfortably.
Yes. As he would say, he won. He's going to win bigly.
Yeah. Last time I looked, it was 277 and 224 and 224.
Yes.
But are you surprised, A, that he won, and surprised, B, that he won by such a margin? And I know it was, sorry to be so long-winded here, but I know it was a little difficult for Mrs. Harris because she jumped in late in the game.
Late. And I'm going to say no. And let me tell you why. Just from a statistical point of view. If you're going into a general elections with the polls on the popular vote tied, the Republican is going to win. Right? That's just how it is, because the way the electoral college map is set up, a Democrat really needs big margins in the key Democratic areas, the metropolitan areas, to overcome, a vast array of rural votes, especially in the middle states. And if that doesn't happen, then you're in problem. So the writing was on the wall in that regard. But beyond that, gentlemen, one of the benefits I had was to go to school in Idaho and get a really good sense of what goes on in the middle of America, not Brooklyn, not LA, not Chicago, not Atlanta. What goes on in the middle of the country. And the truth of the matter is there's been a tremendous amount of dissatisfaction. I also spend a lot of time making sure that I'm not going into either the MAGA bubble or the liberal bubble. In other words, I'm not listening to MSNBC 24/7 or, One Nation 24/7, because then you get into a bubble and you believe what you want to believe. But there are a couple of things I think that have concerned my colleagues on the interior, my friends in the interior of America. There's a certain amount of fatigue with social issues like diversity, equity, inclusion. People say just let the best man win. Why can't people just be men and women? Why do they have to be them, it, they? Why are we allowing women in sports? So there's been a growing fatigue with these sorts of issues across the nation. Now, that really, and this is America now, where pocketbook is key. Those things push the electorate generally, I believe, in a particular direction. But the inflation, which took away people's purchasing power at the end of the day, I think is what tipped a lot of persons. For example, in the Bronx, for the first time since Reagan, 30% of voters in the Bronx went for Trump, which is unusual, and it comes down to pocketbook issues. So I think there's it's a combination of the social change that we're seeing generally, inflation, immigration, what I call a sharp turn right in many countries in the world. And it's capped off those who weren't sure. They said, listen, I can't, it's a gallon of gas costs too much. I can't pay that anymore. And they broke for Trump. So I have to say I'm not extremely surprised.
Yeah. Would you say that Mrs. Harris would have stood a better chance if she was the original Democratic nominee and started off the campaign from that point? All the way through, rather than Biden having started and then had to stop for obvious reasons?
Yeah, here is the challenge. Once you go into a primary, you run all kinds of risks, all right? So the short answer to that question is that we'll never really know, right? But when you go into a primary in the Democratic Party, you could end up coming out with somebody more in the direction of a Bernie Sanders than a Kamala Harris. And how will the general electorate respond to that? I don't know that that would have necessarily been better in the general context of America. And this is not a statement on the appeal of either school of thought, but just the appeal to the American electorate in general. So it's impossible to tell looking back. There's a risk if you had an open elections and runoffs and so on. But I really think, generally speaking, on the points of immigration, inflation, and international conflict, the Democrats were always going to have an uphill struggle, and two of those are inexplicable. The inflation issue was self-inflicted. They put a lot of money in the economy when the economy was doing fine, against advice from economists. And they really had an extremely porous border that nobody could understand why they were continuing to do that.
Yeah. And
whoever the candidate was, I suppose if it were not a candidate who was so close to related to it, in other words, somebody who could come out and say that's a bad idea, then a case could have been made for that person. But it's not. It's immigration is a welcomed idea in the Democratic Party. So I don't think that would have been. It would have been a winning strategy to go against that general sense in the party.
Yeah. I want to follow up on something you mentioned before, or just earlier, sorry, that we've seen a trend where right-leaning ideology has been embraced by many countries in recent times. We've also seen a shift with regard to even the Republicans, where we're thinking about like a Reagan type time when it wasn't extreme right, but it was clearly right of center, but now it's gone all the way right. And the Democrats have really not stood up for much. They've seemed to try to be a little centrist in their approach, but trying to be too inclusive and don't seem to know what they really stand for or stood for. Yeah. What would you say to that school of thought in this particular election, seeing the results?
Right. So let me start with the Democrats first. They have a typical big tent problem, which is that they tend to want to work with, even appease the most extreme elements to their left. That borders should be open, you must defund the police. Everybody must go to school free, you must hire minorities in every position. These sorts of things, and just speaking relatively loosely here. That will have no traction in the middle of an electorate, in the majority of an electorate, and the Democrats have not done well in resisting that or saying no to that. As for the so-called Republicans, now that's a massive shift. Now there was a time, you mentioned Reagan, where being a Republican meant that you were decent, morally upright, fiscally prudent. You believed in free trade, open markets, inclusion. You believed in extending U.S. Power internationally, globally. The U.S. being involved in stabilizing the world and having its part to play in the world. What you have now is not a Republican Party. You have a Trump party, a Trumpist. So it's more like what you'd seen in South America, where you'd have, for example, a Peronist party in Argentina of legend. It's a Trumpist. It's the Trumpist party. He's taken over the Republican infrastructure entirely. It's now the Trumpist party, and it sometimes goes under the moniker MAGA. That movement is populist. That movement is insular, wants to keep America in itself. That movement wants to cut back on trade and have America less involved in the world. That movement, importantly, has taken the working class, which has in the last 50 years has been the foundation of the Democratic Party, has completely taken that over. The working man's party was the Democratic Party. Yeah. Now it is the Republican Party. It's the Republican Party that is speaking to them. Under Reagan, it was business and investment that was investors that was the Republican Party. So it's a good question. It's an important question, and it's an important shift that we have seen. But you cannot come to this with the rules and the structures that we're accustomed to in previous elections. The Trump movement, the MAGA movement, has fundamentally capitalized on what started under the Tea Party. Even before that, frankly, there's always been this shift right, and he has capitalized on it. And we have just a different movement now that's focused on America's citizens, and America first.
Yep. Good to see you. Thanks for speaking with us, Dr. Stokes.
Thank you very much.
Stay safe. Blessings. I suspect Vice President Harris probably will run again.
She can, but as he mentioned, that whole big tent idea.
Yep. All right, development economist Dr. Christian Stokes. After the break, we hear how the gamma irradiator will assist Jamaica. Yep, I got it right, irradiator. Soon come.